Whether you call it hurkle durkling, having a lie-in, ou même faire la grasse matinée, bed rotting is nothing new. There's different names for bed rotting in different cultures because it's something that we all love to do. Rest and reflect. Vital activities for us to partake in as humans. But is bed rotting laziness or luxurious self-care? Let's get into it. I'm Carla. If you're new here, I post video essays like these. My most recent one was on the mob wife aesthetic. And I also post some of my crafting, like crochet content and information about my life abroad in London. So if you're interested in any of those things, then comment down below. Subscribe, like, all of that good stuff, and join our wholesome, creative little community. So this is going to be a fairly short and casual video essay because I've been feeling very tired lately and guilty for feeling tired. And I think my relationship with rest has changed a lot since I moved out of the United States. And maybe I'll talk more about that in a future video because it's kind of an interesting topic. But it just did get me thinking. Actually, what got me thinking was that I want to make a bed skirt. I just moved and the bedroom has a kind of ugly box spring, which I've never had before. I've always had a bed frame. And I want to cover it with a bed skirt that I'm going to sew. So I started thinking about how bed skirts are quite old-fashioned. And maybe before they were old-fashioned, they were considered to be a fancy thing. And I was thinking about how modern bedrooms are no longer luxurious, but maybe we're going back into that. But this video essay is still going to be more about rest. So what is bed rotting? Bed rotting was added to dictionary.com's list of words in 2024, and they define it as the practice of spending many hours in bed during the day, often with snacks or an electronic device, as a voluntary retreat from activity or stress. This is a fairly new internet term, and in my opinion, it's very tongue-in-cheek and self-deprecating, but framed in a sort of anti-productivity culture way. It's basically publicizing the time that we spend in bed doing absolutely nothing, and instead of saying, look how lazy I am, haha, it's kind of saying, this is my time to be lazy, and lazy means something different to me. It's no longer necessarily a negative quality to have. It's something that I cherish. I cherish my bed rotting time. At least in the TikToks and the memes that I've seen, bed rotting is basically being presented as me time. We've seen trends, especially here on YouTube, go back and forth from how to be the most productive girl boss and wake up at 5 a.m. and meal prep all your spinach salads and blah, 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 to how to live a soft life and do slow travel when you can and not work too hard and quiet quit, etc., etc. And even though productivity content and restful self-care content have sort of gone back and forth in popularity, I think throughout time we've seen this sort of self-care revolution on social media, even if we've slipped back into productivity culture with trends like the that girl aesthetic. The Independent even called the bed rotting trend a shunning of hustle culture and productivity in the pursuit of self-care. And unlike a mass obsession with productivity, I would say that an interest in bed rotting, or basically just rest, is nothing new. So I want to get into the roots of this a little bit and talk about why I think rest precedes hustle culture. And considering that 73% of Gen Z would rather have a better quality of life than extra money in the bank, I think it's fair to move this discussion to everyone's favorite topic, capitalism. So I read this really interesting article called The Pursuit of Rest Under Capitalism. The article is really interesting. I would recommend reading it. It's not necessarily hard data, it's more anecdotal, but she talks a lot about why rest is more in line with anti-capitalism than it is with recharging your ability to be productive later on. So to give some context, I don't know where exactly this author is from, but she was living in the US for a long time and went back to her home island. I don't say home country because she said it's an island outside of the West. So it could be, one of the US Virgin Islands or, some sort of territory, but nevertheless, she lives in an island outside the United States, which is her homeland. And she went back to her homeland in 2021, which we all know what was happening around that time. This was also a time where many Americans were becoming familiar with mutual aid for the first time, which the author describes as community-led efforts to meet people's basic needs. The author wrote, "While mutual aid is an admirable aspect of collectivist cultures, romanticizing this social structure during a time of great need might distract from realizing that the normalcy of mutual aid and community-led structures are preceded by the normalcy of poverty and the maldistribution of access and resources." To put that in simple, condensed terms, basically saying that community came before poverty. And why does that relate to capitalism? Because, as this author wrote, capitalism ruptures our sense of belonging and interconnectedness that shows how our survival and rest are dependent on one another's, a reality that hyper-individualized North America sets us up to forget and neglect. All of this to say, quite simply, that I believe rest is natural to us in a way that productivity and hustle culture is not. But why this sudden reboom in embracing rest and being a bit cheeky and calling it new terms like bed rotting or bringing up old terms that make us laugh like hurkle durkling? There are a few internet trends I want to talk about that I think have contributed to this little boom. And the first one is a thirst for romanticism and a softer life. Most obviously, we see trends on social media like soft girl aesthetic or how to live a soft life, etc., etc. People who are making aspirational content showing this is how your life can be with low stress, not worrying about how productive you are, and prioritizing rest above all. Also, if you're watching this part of the video and we're talking about romanticizing the past, romanticizing antiquity, comment a heart emoji. Pick your favorite color. We also see the romanticization of, women in the Regency era or the Victorian era living a lifestyle of leisure and wanting to emulate that. This has come in the form of people bringing back tiny luxuries in the home, like 4-poster beds, bed skirts, or just bringing back a sort of general antiquity and luxury to the bedroom. Very much going against minimalist bedrooms that were trending in the past. A lot of the trends that we saw on social media around 2020 when most people were at home, I think caring about the aesthetic of your home became something that everyone could relate to, as opposed to needing to have a special interest in design to care about what your home looks like. And with that came a sort of more mass popularity of a lot of interior influencers. One that comes to mind is Hummet Spurred, Bridget Mueller. She has this railroad apartment in New York City. It's a rental and she's done it up completely to kind of give the vibes of like a French chateau. Basically, people wanting to decorate their homes and bedrooms again in a way that emulates what we perceive as a softer or easier life in the past. Also, the cost of living of it all. I mean, I saw people talking about wanting a 4-poster bed because it keeps you warm. Because if you have a curtain on all 3 sides or maybe even at the back of your bed, that was actually, it was a luxury. Only certain people of a certain class would have those types of beds, but they were first created to keep out any cold air. And similarly for bed skirts, yes, they were used to hide things, but also to keep in some warmth. And I saw people talking about wanting these things to keep warm so they don't have to turn on the heating. And it's just funny because, we live much easier lifestyles than people have in the past, especially in the West, yet we're still looking for ways to save money on basic needs like heating by basically looking for cheaper ways to stay warm while making sure to keep some antiquity and creativity in the process. We also have such an interest in hyper-feminine aesthetics now. Basically, the resurgence of super girly bedrooms and homes, anything romantic, anything vintage, coquette, meaning anything with bows or ruffles, cottagecore, which maybe isn't as popular now, but definitely is still popular, which in a home would mainly mean anything homemade, lots of cottons, linens, etc. And I also think us embracing rest is a direct response to the productivity culture that was super popular on the internet a few years ago and still is now, depending on what side of the internet you're on. We're going to get into whether or not bed rotting is actually beneficial or if it's self-care, but at the very least, the way people present their bed rotting can sometimes be as a rebellion against the work that they have to do during the day. Similar to a term that you might have heard, which is revenge bedtime procrastination. So Eleanor McGlinchey, who is a sleep psychologist at Manhattan Therapy Collective and an associate professor of psychology at Farley Dickinson University, compared bed rotting to revenge bedtime procrastination. So revenge bedtime procrastination, well, obviously it's supposed to happen at bedtime, so before you sleep, but it could happen at any time, I suppose, is basically laying in bed and scrolling or doing things for yourself endlessly, kind of ruining your sleep, but as a way of trying to get back the hours you lost during the day working for someone else. And this sleep psychologist and professor said that hurkle durkling or bed rotting in the morning is a way of front loading that me time. So basically revenge bedtime procrastination, but right after you wake up. Basically what I'm saying is that for some people, bed rotting is a way of getting revenge on having to be productive during the day, and that it's a direct response, like I said, to productivity culture, but it might not be a healthy one, especially if it's ruining your sleep. So is bed rotting self-care? We're going to look at reasons why it might be and why it also might not be. So let's get into the obvious of bed rotting. Because bed rotting isn't simply just sleeping in, it's like laying in bed with all your snacks, with your drinks, with your frickin' Stanley Cup, with your iPad, with your phone, with a book, with your crochet. It's not extra sleeping time. It's extra time just spent in bed doing nothing. You might be doing something like reading a book or scrolling on your phone, but you're not like actively doing anything. And so the obvious issue with this, if we're saying no, it's not self-care, is that one of the main rules of sleep hygiene is to keep your bedroom for sleeping. You can find many sources that talk about why reserving your bed for sleeping is really important. And I think a lot of people can speak from experience of this having a real effect on their lives. But Robert Kamen, who is a psychologist and the founder and CEO of a drug and mental health rehab or retreat, told The Independent that because you might be watching Netflix in bed, for example, this is a great way to mess up your sleep schedule, or at least that it can make it harder to follow a good sleep schedule. Another reason for why bed rotting might not be great is that even though it doesn't have to do with sleeping longer, it might lead to that. So scientists at the Nanjing Medical University in China found that people who sleep more than 9 hours per night had an increased chance of suffering stroke. But it's not completely known why this link exists, and it could very likely be because of other secondary life factors that might lead to someone sleeping more, like depression, anemia, and having a very sedentary lifestyle. So not necessarily that sleeping more means you might have a stroke, but that these other factors that make you sleep more are also linked to an increased risk of stroke. But I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but that's just, the links aren't completely clear. But if you're watching this, we all like to bed rot from time to time. And I think we're all smart enough to know when it's become an issue. So let's talk a little bit about why it is a valid form of self-care. To counter that finding of an increased risk of stroke for people who sleep a lot, like more than 9 hours a night, those same researchers at the Nanjing Medical University in China found that an extra 2 hours of sleep on the weekend can reduce the chances of a heart attack or stroke by 63%, especially for people who get less than 6 hours of sleep during the week. You might be like, okay, that's like the complete opposite to what they found before, but it's more about, okay, are you consistently sleeping way too much versus are you just having a little bit of a lie-in? And the reason why I say sleeping more is related to bed rotting is because I think if you're bed rotting, there's a chance that maybe that means you slept in and now you're rotting in bed, or you're going to rot in bed and you might fall asleep reading a book or watching Netflix, and therefore you're going to sleep longer. To me, they're kind of similar, but I could be wrong. But that's probably how I would bed rot. It would probably lead to sleeping. At the end of the day, bed rotting is a coping mechanism, and in my opinion, it should just be one tool in your toolkit to deal with stress, anxiety, or to give yourself some self-care. Robert Common, the psychologist who spoke to The Independent, said, "If bed rotting becomes a dominating factor or behavior in how you spend your free time, this could be an indicator of depression or burnout. If you suspect you're experiencing these or other underlying health issues, it's important to seek appropriate support to help identify the root causes and find healthy ways to manage them." And he cites things like exercise and therapy as options. Like I said, I think we're all smart enough to know that if you're spending all of your time in bed, if you're able-bodied and are able to leave the house, that's not a good sign that there might be something else going on. But a little bed rot here and then, a little bit of hurkle durkling, won't hurt anybody, and it might actually help you. That's it for this week's video essay. I hope you enjoyed it. I've had quite a few new people find the channel, which is so exciting. So if you have any video essay topics that you want me to cover, any questions, whether it be about living abroad or crochet or topics that, again, you think would make a good video essay, then hit me up. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a very casual one, maybe a little bit rambly, but I just want to do a fun, chill topic. I mean, I still talked about capitalism, but what can you do? Everything leads back to capitalism, baby. Anyways, thanks again for being here, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!